from the combined newsrooms in Eugene, Roseburg, and Coos Bay. KVAL News at 5 starts now.
As much as Trump desires it, the president is not a king. As much as Trump desires it, a law is not a suggestion.
That is Senator Jeff Merkley speaking earlier today as two major developments came in this afternoon in President Trump's order to freeze federal financial assistance. Oregon's Attorney General is joining 21 other states in suing the Trump administration for the freeze. Also breaking just this afternoon, just moments before it went into effect, a federal judge temporarily blocked the funding pause from taking effect. A lot to cover today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brandon Cameraman.
And I'm Kendall Bartley. Tonight, not only do we have reaction from senators, but local organizations like first responders and nonprofits are explaining how this will directly impact them. Now, Trump's order would have frozen trillions of dollars in federal grants and loans until they could be vetted by his administration. Now, once again, a judge did issue a brief administrative stay this afternoon, blocking the policy from taking effect until Monday.
Trump's order would have, and as early as Monday still could, interrupt funding to a number of programs. But which programs would be affected and for how long? That appeared to be a gray area. Millions of people caught in the confusion today, unsure if they would lose access to things like jobs, services, and health care.
Yeah, the Trump administration spent the morning trying to clarify who will and will not be impacted by that new directive. Erica Brown has more from the White House.
A federal district judge has temporarily blocked President Trump's federal funding freeze pending a hearing for further arguments set for February 3rd. The development comes after White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt held her first briefing Tuesday, tackling a barrage of questions about the plan.
This is not a blanket pause on federal assistance and grant programs from the Trump administration. If you are receiving individual assistance from the federal government, you will still continue to receive that.
In a memo sent last night, the Office of Management and Budget ordered all federal agencies to assess their programs and activities to ensure they comply with President Trump's recent executive orders directing assistance be temporarily frozen.
Every one of our offices has been deluged with calls from people who are in panic. What is this going to mean?
The freeze memo specifically mentions financial assistance for foreign aid, quote, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. Democrats say Trump does not have the authority to freeze funds Congress approved.
This illegal move is a massive overreach by the Trump administration.
Many Republican lawmakers are defending the president's move.
A lot of these grants were predicated on divisive, discriminatory, and illegal DEI. So we'll find out more, but I think it's appropriate to take a look at it.
The Trump administration stressed that the freeze will not impact assistance provided directly to individuals, including Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, and welfare benefits.
Now, our team has been working diligently throughout the day, really, to determine how this is going to have a local impact.
KVAL's Tiffany Lewis in Gold Meadows joining us in studio after reaching out to multiple organizations. Now, Gold, let's start with you. You spoke with local law enforcement agencies. What did you find out?
That's right, Brandon. And multiple local agencies we spoke with had the same result. They don't know what this means or how it directly impacts them. What we do know is they're all impacted. Now let's take a look at first responders for context. Eugene Springfield Fire said it relied on millions in federal grants over the years and actively have one in the works. Meanwhile, Springfield police are still evaluating. The Eugene Police Department says it has relied on about $2 million in federal funds for things like body-worn cameras, in-car video, and behavioral health. Now EPD says future purchases are on hold. We also reached out to several school districts to gauge the outlook across the county. Both Eugene 4J schools and Springfield Public Schools say they have to wait for guidance from the Oregon Department of Education to know what specific programs could be impacted by the federal funding pause. Kelly McIver with 4J tells us they are concerned that there may be serious impacts on the district's financial picture. For example, McIver says the district serves roughly 12,000 meals a day through their federally funded lunch program, which could potentially be among programs to fill that funding freeze. Still, McIver says until they know more, there's no clear outcome for parents to worry about.
Yeah, still a lot of unknown, and that's what we've seen essentially across the board today from multiple agencies. Tiffany, you actually spoke with one of our largest nonprofits.
Yeah, so St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County, a provider of affordable housing and homeless services in our region, heavily depends on federal funding, primarily through Section 8 vouchers and veteran housing programs. St. Vinny's receives millions of dollars in federal support. The nonprofit says these subsidies provided by agencies like the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Veteran Affairs are critical to its ability to offer affordable housing and support. Much of this funding is secured through applications responding to federal and local requests for proposals. Terry McDonald with St. Vinny's says amid the Trump administration's review of organizations for efficiency and waste, the organization remains focused on community support.
I think you'll find our programs are remarkably efficient and as conforming to federal guidelines as possible. In times of change, have faith in our community. I do.
St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County was established in 1954 and is the largest nonprofit human services organization in Lane County.
All right, both of you looking into so much as when this hit this morning. It really came in last night. We were trying to digest it all, and you two worked really hard to get us some information, and we're still waiting on a lot more information.
Definitely.
Yeah, tonight we're also hearing from the Eugene Water and Electric Board on how that freeze could impact several of their programs. The EWEB Communications Supervisor, Aaron Orlowski, says some of the major initiatives at risk include a $5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Energy for their hydroelectric project on the Mackenzie River. Also at risk could be reimbursement of roughly $9 million from FEMA for reconstruction after the 2024 ice storm. Plus, he says EWEB was counting on roughly $20 million in FEMA grants they were awarded that could now be in jeopardy. Orlowski says they're also in the process of applying for $105 million in FEMA grants to help with rebuilding after the ice storm and restoring fish passage, that could now be affected. He says they will continue to closely track Trump's efforts to freeze federal funding and the impacts it could have on those local programs.
Oregon State Treasurer also releasing a statement today saying through the state's responsible fiscal management, the state treasury has an adequate balance of funds to sustain vital federally funded programs in the short term. Now, she continued to say that she's working with agencies to keep programs that rely on that funding to continue to run and minimize harm. She joined Governor Tina Kotek and Attorney General Dan Rayfield in calling on the administration to release the funds to Oregon and other states.
Now, Brandon, you actually spoke with Senator Merkley earlier this afternoon, just before that federal judge put a stay on that freeze.
Yeah, after the press conference we saw of him earlier in the newscast, but just minutes before the judge came in with that freeze. So here's some of our conversation, starting with me asking what information he was getting from the White House throughout the day. Do you have any more clarity now than you did this morning on what this all means?
We've got a tremendous amount of reports back from the state about the grants being shut down, the loans being shut down, and just regular disbursements for programs, whether that's disbursements, for example, like for Head Start. So a lot of things were shut down instantly. It touches families in every possible way: healthcare, housing, education. It touches our state through the infrastructure projects being frozen, even grants for the police and fire, both for equipment and for staffing, are shut down. It's chaos right now, and it's chaos that's hurting America and American families in every possible way. And this has been before the courts time and time again, where they are clear the president does not have the power to decide which programs get funded. That's in congressional power of the purse in the Constitution. The president is supposed to execute. And right now, instead, it's basically a sweeping authoritarian takeover of government, and we must resist.
What do you say to people? We've been reaching out to so many agencies and businesses and such that receive federal funding, and the answer we keep getting is we don't really know right now. We're still trying to figure it out. What are you? I'm sure you're getting questions in your office. What do you say to these people? What do you say to these agencies about what to do right now?
Well, what they have to do right now is they have to kind of stand firm that this is wrong, send the message back up the chain. Of course, we're carrying that message here in Congress. We're going to do, it'll be carried in the courts, but that's not the place to carry. This is just wrong. I mean, Trump needs to reverse this illegal, unconstitutional action.
Until then, should, even like school lunches, should families expect that to continue? Should we hold back on funding with concerns that it might not get reimbursed properly? How should people go about it?
This is the dilemma we're hearing from every program administrator. Do we keep going ahead? Do we keep going ahead with that school lunch program, with that Head Start program, knowing if we can't get reimbursed, we'll be bankrupt and we have to shut the whole thing down? Nobody has a perfect answer. Certainly, if you have any way to keep going, keep going. This is an illegal action. It will be reversed, but how long will it take? We're not sure. And realize they said, we want to review all of these programs to see if they are fitting with the president's priorities. The president doesn't get to decide what programs are funded. The president has the possibility of suggesting a budget for the next year. He can veto the funding programs for the next year if the president doesn't like them. The president has enormous influence, but existing programs that have already been funded, that are operating under the law, the president does not get to change that. The president cannot constitutionally impound funds and shut down programs.
How should this have been handled? He wants to do a review of federal spending. How should this have been handled?
It's called a presidential budget for the year ahead. And there is a formal way a president can reverse funding for the existing year. It's called a rescission. It's in the 1974 Budget and Impoundment Control Act. So the president can say, hey, you all sent me all this money for, I don't know, for this strategic nuclear warhead program, but we don't need it. I'm asking you to reverse that. And Congress has 45 days to address it when there's a rescission request. That's the way you constitutionally address existing programs. You cannot simply do it by saying, I'm going to sit on the funds and only pass on the funds for the programs I like. That's unconstitutional. That's breaking the law. That's chaos. That's hurting families. That's ending infrastructure projects. That's lawsuits over broken contracts. It's a mess and wrong at every level.
I should point out there that that conversation that I had with Senator Merkley was just before the judge blocked, or put a stay, I should say, on the order. We're going to bring in Chandler James here. Senator Merkley, you heard, providing some context as to the historical precedent and why he says the funding was unconstitutional, the freeze was unconstitutional. These are complicated issues, and that's why we bring you in, Political Science Assistant Professor at the University of Oregon, Chandler James. Thanks as always coming in, Chandler.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you always provide a lot of clarity. So it's day 8, President Trump, of course, issuing a lot of executive orders. Can you explain to us, what is an executive order and how exactly does it work?
So the president is the sole head of the executive branch. They're the chief executive of our government, our federal bureaucracy. And as in that capacity, they have a lot of discretion over how rules are promulgated, how the agencies conduct themselves. And so executive orders are often just instructions to agencies or different members of the federal bureaucracy to accord to a rule in a certain way. Executive orders are supposed to be constitutional, and when they are not constitutional and it's brought before the Supreme Court, they can strike them down.
So that's maybe where we're headed with this, or obviously in the courts right now. But Republicans and Democrats use executive orders. Presidents from both parties, how have they been used historically? And can we look back at Trump's first term and how he used them in his first term?
So executive orders have been a tremendous tool for presidents to shape public policy here in the United States. The Emancipation Proclamation was effectively an executive order which freed slaves who were captured by the Union Army. FDR, he did the Japanese internment through executive order, through a unilateral action that was unconstitutional later found to be. Truman desegregated the armed services through an executive order. Executive orders have been used for a wide array of things, including protecting millions of acres of natural land and determining certain abortion policy and how it's used abroad. Trump used executive orders to help fund his border wall in his first administration, transferring discretionary funds to try to build this thing. And this was challenged by the Democrats. But yeah, they've been used widely in American politics.
Now you bring up the Democrats. Democrats, of course, saying the president is overstepping his power. Is there any validity to that statement?
Well, what Merkley and Democrats have said is that presidents are supposed to execute the law, but Congress is responsible for the purse strings of the nation. They raise taxes and spend money. And so when they appropriate money for certain activities, for certain policies, they expect that money to be delivered and those policies to be executed, even if the president doesn't agree with the way that that money is being spent. And they're saying that the Trump administration is infringing upon constitutional prerogatives of Congress. And so what will happen is that this will be litigated in the courts. And the courts will determine to what extent or whether or not this was an unconstitutional act.
And it's interesting because obviously Oregon signed on as one of multiple states, over a dozen states, that is suing regarding this particular order. And it's hung up in the courts. That's not actually the actual lawsuit that caused that federal judge, but that's also part of the what's in the courts right now. So the judicial system sort of has control of this right now. How does that play out? Supposed to be the additional check on the executive branch?
So it's in the court system, but these are not the only factors that shape whether or not unilateral action will go through. So what President Trump is doing is he's taking initiative and he's throwing something into motion. And then it's up to other people, Congress, to respond. If they choose not to respond, then he wins. He's set the policy. If they choose to respond and it goes to the courts, then it may be determined by the courts. But other factors also prevail, such as public opinion. So that's why we see senators from the Democratic Party going out and talking about this, bringing their case before the public, because the public has a tremendous role in terms of their attitudes toward this action in determining whether or not how the Supreme Court will act on this particular action.
And if they do eventually put a stop to it, how will that decision be enforced?
So this is one of the real constitutional opportunities for constitutional crises in our government. So if the president chooses to not enforce a Supreme Court ruling, it does set forth a constitutional struggle that Congress and the courts will have to rectify. But so much of this depends upon the political opinion shaping the nature of the conflict. And so the Congress, the courts, the president, and the public are all key actors in the way that executive orders are adjudicated.
Very interesting, and certainly an unusual day. We're 8 days into the Trump administration and trying to wrap our heads around everything that happened today, and you do such a great job of helping us understand what is hard to understand.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Chandler. We appreciate it.
We'll be right back after the break.